I'm Dr. Paul Jenkins. I'm a clinical psychologist. Today I'll be reacting to the concept of attitude from a pilot's perspective. First, I'll introduce my pilot. This is Adam. He's actually my son, and a licensed pilot, and a Live on Purpose certified coach. So I thought, Adam, you'd be the perfect person to bring on for this conversation today. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
This is kind of fun because as a psychologist, I work with attitude all the time. It's a word that comes up. We discuss it in sessions or in coaching, in presentations or trainings. Attitude, you've heard about how important attitude is. A few years ago, one of my friends pointed out to me that attitude is actually an aviation term. And you know this because you're a pilot.
Right.
Adam, what is attitude from an aviation perspective? As a pilot, what's your take on that?
Right. Yeah. So attitude, if you're like me, you wouldn't have known that attitude was an aviation term. Before I was in aviation, I'd maybe heard of, altitude or wings, airplane, but pretty limited understanding of aviation terms. But attitude is a very important aviation concept. And basically what it represents is it's your airplane's position relative to the horizon. So,
okay, the position of the plane.
Right. Yeah. So it doesn't actually tell you anything about the current, trajectory of your airplane, but it's just the position and where your airplane is going to be within the next 6 seconds, minute, few minutes, whatever.
So you brought a model to show us.
I brought a model. I feel like it's a lot
This
easier
helps,
to
'cause
understand.
I'm a visual person.
So you can kind of imagine my hand here is the horizon, and the airplane, the attitude would be its position relative to the horizon. So there's a banking attitude, a nose high attitude, and a nose low attitude.
Yeah, that's heading you into the hard stuff.
Right.
Nose down attitude.
You don't want to have a nose down attitude.
I want to react to this as a psychologist because often attitude is assumed to be how you feel. Okay, you'll say somebody has a bad attitude, or I have a bad attitude, or whatever, right?
Right.
Attitude isn't how you feel, it's your position. And I love how this aviation concept can come into psychology and help us understand it's not how we feel, it's our position relative to what? You said that the plane, it's relative to the horizon, right?
Right.
And so a nose down attitude is heading you into the hard stuff. A nose up attitude is going to give you altitude.
Correct.
Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
In psychology, I think we can look at that in a very similar way. Our position toward whatever it is, okay? So instead of the horizon, it's our position toward our circumstances or what it is in our life. We take a position about that. So if I ask you, for example, how's your day? Your position about that represents your attitude or your position toward your day.
Right.
You can say, well, I'm having a great day, or I'm having a really terrible day. It's just a day until you take a position about it. Anyway, that's what my psychologist mind is doing with what you've shared with us about the aviation term. Adam, you gave me an experience a couple of weeks ago. In fact, let's pull up a picture of that. You can see here on the screen, this is me and Adam in a little 2-seat sport cruiser. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Which Adam was piloting. And first of all, this is kind of surreal as a father to be up in the sky in an airplane and he's at the controls. It was really a cool experience. But we went flying. Down on my knees was this control panel. You see this on the screen right now. And this is different, I think, from the old school planes where they didn't have the digital technology and whatnot. But there are a lot of things to track there. And it kind of blew my mind because I'm not trained in that. I'm not a licensed pilot. But you are, and you were looking at all of those instruments. Tell us a little bit about that control panel and just how important that is to a pilot.
Yeah, well, definitely the control panel is extremely important when you're flying. One of the reasons being in the sky, other than just blue sky, there are clouds. And planes fly through clouds, which means you often can't see where you're going. So you're very reliant on your panel to see where you're going. And one of the most important indications that you need to see is that attitude indicator that we were talking about earlier, where you can see if your airplane is headed in a certain direction or what the trend is going to be.
You said that the attitude indicator is the most important instrument there. I saw a lot of instruments on that control panel, and quite frankly, I didn't even know what some of them were, but the attitude indicator was very prominent. Remember, I asked you during our flight, what's this thing? You said, that's the attitude indicator, and I'm like, that must be pretty important.
Right.
Help us to understand why that's so important in the controls of the airplane as you're piloting that aircraft.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why the attitude indicator is so important is that there are a lot of situations in flying where your body sensations can kind of throw off your perception of reality.
Okay.
We call it spatial disorientation in aviation, but basically, you may feel that you're going up and that you're pointed upward, but you're actually going to be level or pointed down just by the feeling in your body and in your seat.
So your feelings can deceive you.
Very true, yeah.
Oh, I could play with that as a psychologist.
Right.
How often do our feelings take us in a direction that we didn't intend to go? Again, attitude is not how you feel, it's your position. So let's not let our feelings interfere with piloting the craft. Right? Is that a fair summary?
No, that's a perfect example, because that's exactly what you want to do when you're in the airplane. Say you're getting tossed around in turbulence, and after getting jumbled a little bit, you forget which way's up and which way's down.
You literally don't know.
Yeah, you can't feel it.
You
and
can't
it's happened
tell
to
from
me.
your
You cannot
feelings.
tell at all. So the first thing you want to do is you look down at the attitude indicator, and it'll tell you where your airplane's headed. So you want to set your attitude first thing when trouble hits. And that'll get you set up for the best solution.
I think you explained this to me when we were on the flight too, that if you get into trouble, the first thing you check is your attitude.
Right.
Make sure that's where it needs to be. And then you can pay attention to things like airspeed and altitude, and that's going to determine where you're going. In fact, maybe we ought to come back to that too in just a minute. But as a psychologist, I'm thinking about how many parallels there are as we look at how we feel. Now, you're never wrong about how you feel, but like in aviation, your feelings may be deceptive in terms of what needs to happen next. Your attitude is what's going to determine where you're going. So, am I accurate in saying that the attitude indicator doesn't really tell you where you are, but it has a whole lot to do with where you're going?
Yes, that's perfect.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
And that's going to be really important, right? If you want to get out of trouble, if you're in some kind of a storm, or if you've lost orientation somehow in the plane. Mm-hmm. Wow. Adam, your experience as a pilot, I think, is really relevant from a psychological standpoint as I think about this concept of attitude as being position. It's not how you feel, it's your position. And that's going to determine how you feel or have some impact on what direction you're going to go from here. I'm sure that you've seen some utility to this in coaching as well, as you've provided coaching for people. What have you noticed there?
Yeah, definitely. Well, just like in flying, so I kind of like to relate it, if you think of your altitude maybe as how you feel. If you're at a high altitude, you feel elevated. At low altitude, you feel kind of depressed. And say you erroneously somehow lose some altitude, you get down to a low altitude. Well, the first thing you want to do is set that attitude, set a nose high attitude, so your airplane starts to climb and you start getting out of that.
That sounds to me like positivity.
Yeah.
Or the way we talk about it at Live on Purpose, that it's not just a trite, fluffy, just think positive sort of thing. It's set your attitude, your position on purpose relative to whatever it is that's going on in your life. I think that's how you're referring to it as well.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So even if you're feeling down or you're getting kind of bumped around, the first thing you want to do is check your attitude. Where am I headed from here? It doesn't really matter how you feel at that moment. That's just a lot of times a product of your surroundings and what's happened. And we can't always control that. But what you can control is where your position is going forward, where you're setting up for the future. You kind of want to set whatever you know is going to be best to get you where you want to go.
And do that on purpose.
Right.
This is the power of that concept of attitude. I'm so glad that you shared your experience with us as a pilot. Thanks for sharing that today.
Thanks for having me today. It was a pleasure.
You know, Adam, before we even had this conversation, I did another video about the disadvantages of a negative attitude. You might want to cue that one up next. Go take a look at that one as well. If this has caught your attention and you'd like to talk with Adam or one of our other certified coaches, come on over to Live on Purpose Central, where we can get you hooked up with an attitude adjustment.
Onto the phone. And I wished I had